In all three of our readings today, we have stories of calling. We have in our first reading the story of Isaiah being cleansed by the seraph with a burning coal, and then taking on the call of the Lord to prophecy to the people. And then in the second reading, we have, amid a creedal statement, Paul's reference to his Damascus Road encounter with the resurrected Christ. And finally, we have the calling of Simon Peter, Andrew, James, and John on the Sea of Galilee. What strikes me when reading these three passages is the context of one another, is that none of these great figures in salvation history was seeking these callings. Each was trying to live his life and got caught up in God's plan. But also, each was kind of making a mess of things before God called him. Isaiah has the vision of the heavenly court and describes himself as a man of unclean lips who lives among an unclean people. Paul describes himself as a persecutor of the church of God. And Simon Peter, Andrew, James, and John seem to be mediocre fishermen at best, who have spent the entire night out on the waters and are preparing to return home empty-handed. They were living their lives they had been taught to live, and they were failing. Not that they weren't trying. We don't know much about Isaiah's life before the encounter, but Paul was well known for being an opponent of early Christianity. And in the Acts of the Apostles is even memorialized as being the man at whose feet the lynch mob laid their cloaks while they stoned the deacon Stephen to death. And the four fishermen were out all night trying to find the fish. And honestly, I can relate. There have been times in both my personal and professional lives when I have put my whole self into trying to make something work, whether a relationship, a career path, a hobby, or whatever. In each case, when it was just me pouring my whole being into something and still failing, I got to a point where I could not help but surrender. Now, I said surrender, and I chose that word carefully. This is not about giving up, but rather giving in. And not giving in to the imperfection, chaos, and sinfulness of this world, but rather giving in to the realization that what I was trying to make happen was not what God's plan for me held. And when I came to this point of surrender, when I stopped trying to, by sheer force of will, make something happen that was never meant to be, then I found peace and fulfillment in my true path, all of which I would never have experienced if I had gotten my own way. Not to say that the true path did not involve pain and struggle. Nothing in this life is perfect, and nothing in this life is without pain and struggle. But the joy and freedom that comes with surrendering oneself to God's plan makes that pain and struggle worthwhile. And that is what I see in these three calling stories as well. When Isaiah surrenders himself, turns away from the sinfulness of his past, and gives in to a burning coal touching his lips, he is transformed into one of the greatest prophets in the scriptures. When Paul surrenders himself on the road to Damascus and turns from persecuting the church, he became one of the greatest of the apostles, a man to whom half of the New Testament books are attributed, and the primary reason that Christianity survived as a world religion rather than as just another Jewish sect. And when Simon Peter goes from trying to find fish in the usual place and instead follows Jesus' instructions to go deeper, to move far away from the safety of the shore, to sail into infamously unstable waters, he finds greater success than he knows what to do with. And then he leaves that success behind to follow in the way and become another of the greatest leaders of the early church. When we talk about sin, we often dwell on individual actions that break specific rules. When we look through scriptures, these rules were created to lead us away from sinfulness, from that worldview that causes us to look to ourselves for that which comes from God. The sinful worldview in different people expresses itself in different ways, through selfishness, through stubbornness, through anything that causes us to ignore the needs of others, to see all of our accomplishments as things we did on our own, rather than as blessings that God has worked through us. We are all sinners. But the good news is that God knows this, loves us in the midst of our sinfulness, and calls us to surrender the freedom of God's love. Amen.